I want to thank you, first of all, Professor Fabio Bertato, for inviting me on last December in Rome during one of his trips. He proposed me to come to Campinas in order to foster this group, this interdisciplinary group that he was going to carry on. I would like to thank the Institute of Philosophy and Human Sciences and the Department of Philosophy of the Unicampus, and especially Professor Itália Ottaviano, Professor João Romano, Professor José Boldrini, and also the director of the Center for Logic, Epistemology and History of Science, Professor Walter Canielli. Perhaps if he is not here, he will be on next Tuesday. And I'm also happy because, as far as I know, the program of this interdisciplinary course follows by near a program that we organized, that we carried on in Rome. And so there is some cultural interchange between your program and the program that we first carried on in Rome. This is a further occasion of gratefulness for me here. And the title of the seminar is the notion is on the notion of God. Does the notion of God has a rational access? Do we have a rational access from empirical level and from philosophical level to this notion? And if we have a look to what is happening now, we see that the notion of God today is quite common also in scientific labs. I used to show this comic at the beginning of these lectures. The Hubble telescope is providing us with incredibly distant images of a very early universe. Ultimate questions about origin, about creation, about the meaning of it all, questions that were addressed in the departments of philosophy and in the departments of theology, today, at the level of questions, they begin to be raised also in scientific labs. We face with this novelty. So also theologians has to face with this novelty. George Smoot, Prize Nobel for his studies on background pre-Kelvin radiation, wrote, "We have observed the oldest and largest structures ever seen in the early universe. If you are religious, it's like seeing God." Stephen Hawking was Stephen Hawking was quite critical about the notion of God, but he uses it at times. So long as the universe had a beginning, we could suppose it had a creator. But if the universe is really self-contained, having no boundary or edge, it would have neither beginning nor end. It would simply be. What place then for a creator? I do not enter now in commenting on if Stephen Hawking is right or not. The only thing I want to emphasize is the reference to a creator from the level of empirical knowledge, from the level of scientific research. Albert Einstein. I want to know how God created this world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. I would like to follow this path First point, some epistemological clarification. The second point, the meaning of a reference to the absolute beyond the formal language of science. The third step, the ontological incompleteness of a physical contingent reality and the opening to a metaphysical necessary foundation. Fourth step, the acknowledgement of a logos as an objective rational order in a nature, understood as logos ut ratio, in the work of science. And finally, the fifth step, the acknowledgement of a logos as a dialogical otherness, logos ut verbo, in the research activity of science. By the word otherness, I mean something in front of you, something different from you, and an objective alterity. This I mean by the word otherness. First step, some epistemological clarification. I don't know if I am obstructing with my person on this. It's okay. In science popularization, but also in some scientists' philosophical reflection, the notion of God or other notions associated to that is called into debate, to affirm or to deny it. References to God usually appear in the following scientific contexts. This is kind of cover, of book cover that you have in bookstore. The quest about the origin in cosmology, the inquiry about the source of the intelligibility and information existing in nature. This occurs in mathematics, in physics, in chemistry, and biology. Also the debate on finalism in nature, either affirmed or denied. However, it is clear that the notion of God, as it is discussed in the philosophical and theological context, cannot be object of the natural sciences, as these investigate nature in its experimental and quantitative aspects. But we do not stop here, because if we stop here, you could say, why this seminar? The point is that science is made by human persons, and these human persons, scientists, they have an approach to nature, which is a complete approach. They use scientific method, but they use also other sources of knowledge, and they try to put them together. So this is the reason why the seminar continues. Questioning about the access to the notion of God in the context of scientific rationality does not mean to argue about any demonstration of the existence of God. It means rather to ask if a notion of God is meaningful also for a subject whose rationality, whose mind, is shaped by contemporary scientific culture. So our task is not to provide any demonstration of God, but to try to see if this notion is meaningful, or on the contrary is senseless for people who live in the context of scientific rationality. It is our task to show if it is reasonable, if it makes sense for that subject to take into consideration what philosophy, metaphysics, must say about God. To listen to biblical revelation or to theology as they speak of the Word of God addressed to human beings. But the point is that in order to to let this statement have a sense, you need to show that the notion of God at least is a meaningful notion. If you don't show that it is a meaningful notion, you cannot compare it with these contents, these philosophical and theological contents. So our task is to work here about the meaning of this notion. Philosophy, theology, and science in the notion of God. Philosophy has access to a notion of God as absolute, primary cause, up to offer rational paths to its existence, starting both from the cosmos or from the human being. We call them cosmological paths and anthropological paths. Also, theology speaks of God, starting from the Judeo-Christian revelation, centered on the proclamation of Jesus Christ dead and risen, and on his relations with God the Father and the Holy Spirit, a triune and one God, creator of the world and Lord of history. What about scientific rationality? Scientific rationality is not asked to speak of God, nor to demonstrate any scientific path which leads to him. However, it can be only asked to acknowledge that this notion does not contradict the analysis of empirical sciences, cannot be considered nonsensical, and finally, that it is in tune with the existential dimension of researchers' activity. This is, in my opinion, the terrain of scientific rationality concerning this notion. Remembering the famous 5 ways by Thomas Aquinas, ways towards God, these ways show 2 parts in their reasoning. The first part is a philosophical path. Each of these ways reaches a prime mover, a first efficient cause, a per se necessary being, the infinite cause of all perfections, and an intelligent final cause of the universe. There are 5 philosophical paths. This is the first part of the path. The second part is a statement. Thomas Aquinas says, and they all call it God. We will focus on this second part, not on the first, but on this second. Our task here is to investigate whether the second part of the articulation, and they all call it God, which refers to a kind of pre-comprehension of the term God, is still meaningful for people who study reality according to the methods of science. I'm going slowly in order to let our translator to do her work. I'm just summarizing many things that you already know. But I suppose that the novelty is the path that I am offering you. I do not want to teach you new things, but just to arrange things perhaps in a way that is not very common in a class of science or in philosophy in a state university. To let the theological or philosophical notion of God be recognized as meaningful, also in the context of scientific rationality, and so not refused as nonsensical, we need to show that scientific method remains open to one or more semantic areas which transcend it. This is the first thing that we have to do. Try to see if scientific method remains open to one or more semantic areas which transcend the scientific method in itself. The second point that we have to do is to see if this semantic area or these semantic areas, if they are more than one, are available for a discourse on a logos, as this is made by philosophy or theology. That is, the discourse on the logos is made by philosophy or on theology. But this discourse should be done within a semantic area left open by scientific method. And scientific method should recognize that there are meaningful semantic areas outside the empirical level. A discourse on the logos does not contradict any scientific knowledge, nor it comes into conflict with the scientific analysis of nature. We require these three conditions. However, a logos, an absolute, can be judged as a meaningful notion, also depending on the meaning that we give to terms as being, existence, reality, reason, rationality, nature, matter. Because if some of you say, well, the only rationality is empirical rationality, we end our discourse here. So it also depends on the content that we give to all these terms. If some of you say, all being is made by material entities, matter alone, we stop here. It depends on the meaning we give to these terms. Also, it depends on the influence of some idealistic, reductionist, philosophical precomprehensions, such as all that exists must be object of experimental and quantitative knowledge. That is, all that exists does not transcend matter. Democritus and the atomists. Another kind of precomprehension. The only truth we can manage is the logical one. The only idea of reason is that associated to the empirical sciences. This was the program of neo-positivists, Bertrand Russell. Or the subject is the beginning of all knowledge, as the principles for that knowledge are provided by his categories. Here is Immanuel Kant. Study from sensible knowledge is not possible to infer effects which transcend empirical knowledge. In my opinion, all these statements are philosophical pre-comprehension. So my test is to left them aside. Because if we endorse one of them, we do not endorse any scientific result. We endorse a specific philosophical view. But we are asking to the scientific empirical level if the notion of God is sensical or nonsensical. We suggest the following four semantic areas. While scientific methods point toward these areas, they lie outside of its analysis. They so are good candidate to show that a discourse about the logos is not excluded by scientific rationality. I will try to show you these four semantic areas in which a discourse on God is possible. The first semantic area is the room left open by the fact that the logical and formal incompleteness of scientific language. Scientific language has logical and formal incompleteness, so there is a semantic area beyond this logical and formal completeness. In the incompleteness, we point toward the semantic area. A second semantic area is individuated by the ontological incompleteness of scientific analysis. Scientific analysis needs the being of things. Science does not create anything, of course. It needs entities which in turn have being. If scientific method is not able to pose the being but receives the being, then scientific method has an ontological incompleteness. So we have here another area, another semantic area. The meaning of being. The meaning of being is not managed by science, but science needs it in order to work. A fourth semantic area, information, the informational incompleteness of nature. Nature does not create information, but information is in nature. Science needs information to work, but it does not pose information. And finally, the incompleteness of scientific method about values and meanings, although science is a work of a personal subject. We need values and meanings to do science, because if I want to do a research, I have to demonstrate to my boss that my research is a good one and it deserves money. And I used to do this making appeal to value and meanings. I need a value and meanings to do science. This is a kind of semantic area which is beyond the empirical level. Each of these incompletenesses operate as an openness of science towards other kinds of knowledge. Each of these openings are associated to four foundations of scientific activity.
In the previous slide, you didn't tell us who are the persons, who are the photos. Some students don't know.
Okay. Georg Cantor, which is associated to this kind of incompleteness. James Clerk Maxwell, who I associate to this kind of incompleteness. Albert Einstein, who I associate to this kind of incompleteness. And Michael Polanyi, who I associate to this kind of incompleteness. Thank you so much. You interrupt me and ask me whenever you want in order to make the things clear. We need a logical epistemological foundation. We need an ontological foundation. We need a rational foundation. And we need an anthropological foundation. So these four areas can be put in relation with these four foundations of scientific activity. Scientific rationality and scientist who makes a science acknowledges the meaningfulness of these semantic areas. They are left open and go beyond both scientific language and empirical analysis. In other words, they are recognized as meaningful, but left open by scientific methods. They are windows. They are four windows. In the house of science, there are four windows. They belong to the house, but let scientists see the wide world outside. They belong to the house, just as these windows belong to this building. Because the scientists are able to see that these windows exist. But they are windows. And so they let us to see outside. Just a short comment. I prefer to speak of windows, not of limits. many other authors, when commenting on those incompleteness, used to say, these are the limits of science. Science cannot do this. Science cannot do this other. Science has to stop here. Why to speak about this? They are windows. We have the curiosity to see what are the things outside the windows. Curiosity is a virtue for a researcher, isn't it a virtue? So we need curiosity. Let's see outside the window. Okay, let's begin to see together outside the window. The meaning of a reference to the absolute beyond the formal language of science. Immanuel Kant's critical philosophy represents the most severe denial of any access to the notion of God or to transcendence from the context of the activity of sciences. To know, erkennen, is possible only in the realm of pure reason. To think, denken, is proper to the realm of practical reason, the only one where any reference to God, moral values, etc., shall make sense. Within the field of pure reason, transcendence cannot be affirmed nor denied. The idea of God is an antinomy, as it is not object of any experience. In the frame of scientific knowledge, the notion of God is meaningless, according to Kant. As a consequence, any discourse about God or on moral principles has no universal objective value, and it remains non-communicable on rational basis. So we need to overcome Kant. This is a severe criticism to our discourse. So we have to find a way to go beyond this theoretical frame. Another severe criticism was made by neo-positivists, Carnap. According to the logical neo-positivism, the notion of God does not make sense in any context. Under the perspective of ontological reductionism, there is no reality beyond logical and empirical categories.
Who is it?
Carnap. Rudolf Carnap. Bertrand Russell. The problem of logical neo-positivism was to build up the axiomatic complete and self-referential language, capable of expressing all reality through axiomatic formal statements, linked in a non-ambiguous way to the world of facts. Logic was thought to have the property of a foundational theory, and this same property was affirmed of mathematics as capable of a complete axiomatization. Finally, all the other sciences depend on the language of maths. All knowledge could be reduced to the empirical knowledge of the natural sciences. This was the program of neo-positivism. Gödel, Alan Turing, and Ludwig Wittgenstein. However, this program resulted non-practicable. It had to clash against two serious limits, and here I use the word limits because they are limits, not windows. The impossibility to build a logical, mathematical, axiomatic system which was capable to offer from within all the elements needed to take decisions and perform all computations. They are just examples of this. The second limit was the need to insert any system and any language within a more general language of system, a meta-language, in order to supply the lower level language with the very meanings of the terms used in the lower language. Every system needs a meta-system. Every language needs a meta-language in order to give meanings to the terms we use. Okay. This result was made mainly by Ludwig Wittgenstein. A philosophical path indicating the room for a discourse on the absolute was showed by Wittgenstein. Formerly involved in the foundation of a language capable of avoid all ambiguities and nonsensical concepts, try to establish a rigorous connection between words and facts. Wittgenstein ends by finding that such a problem was unable to deny the meaningfulness of notion belonging to moral order. These are very famous phrases by Wittgenstein. I will not read them, they are very well known. Then reality is more than our words. Semantic is more than syntax. In summary, we have learned from Wittgenstein's lesson, if only we could distance ourselves from the logical world of facts belonging to science, while looking at this world from outside, then we would soon realize that the problem of meaning does exist. We cannot define it in terms of a formal language. The problem of the meaning of it all is something mystical. This is the adjective that Wittgenstein used, mystical. The philosophical path blazed by Wittgenstein overcomes the conclusions of Kantian pure reason. This is the way we choose to go beyond Kant, Wittgenstein. Because the question of meaning and the openness to the inexpressible both arise from an analysis coming from within scientific knowledge, rather than from outside it. Kant would have said, it's not possible from within the empirical knowledge to point to two notions outside empirical knowledge. Wittgenstein demonstrated that it is possible from within. Wittgenstein's step surpassed the neo-positivists as well. Just like the neo-positivists, Wittgenstein drew a line between what we can speak and what we must remain silent about. But the important difference is that the neo-positivists had nothing to keep silent about. They wanted to say all. This is the difference. They both are silent, but one because saying that there is nothing, and the other say the Wittgenstein that we must keep silent because there are many things that we cannot say, but that they exist. Indeed, for the positivists, only that which we can speak about is important in life. Wittgenstein, on the contrary, passionately believed that what is important in human life is that which, according to his vision, must be held in silence. Let's go to our step 3. I hope you are not so tired. We are early in the afternoon. It is not a good hour to do philosophy. Helped by the iconography by Escher. the ontological incompleteness of physical contingent reality and the opening to metaphysical necessary foundation. The need for an implicit ontological foundation of the activity of science can be put in light considering the following assertion. At the basis of all the natural sciences, there is a philosophy of nature. At the basis of all philosophy of nature, there is an ontology. Sooner or later, all ontology must face with the problem of contingency. Problem of contingency means why things exist. And then consider the relation between being a contingent and being necessary. In order to let science study material objects, these must exist. Material object must exist, must have being. Science cannot provide the very reason for their existence, nor for the ultimate way of why of being as such, as it is concerned with the transformation of a material entity into another. In addition to their existence, science needs also the formal specificity of physical entities. That is, their fundamental properties, why they are the way they are and not otherwise. Just a short comment. What I mean by fundamental property are those philosophical properties which belong to the essence of things. These properties are not measured, are not quantitative properties, but they are properties in philosophy of nature that let quantitative property to be observed and remain stable, remain steady. For instance, the fixed charge of an electron, the stable mass of a proton, they are not fundamental properties in this sense, because we can manage them and transform them into an outcome. But the very fact why these properties are those and not other, this fact must lie upon some philosophical ground that was called in classical metaphysics quidditas, essentia. Why things are the way they are and not otherwise. So at a certain level, you have to stop on some philosophical basement, okay? Which is the very fundamental property of the material entity as such. Yes. Think, for instance, to the attraction of masses by gravity. At the level of empirical analysis, we have different ways to formulate the attraction of the masses. We can do this in a Newtonian frame, we can do this in a relativistic frame. We have different formulas to express why there is gravity between one mass and another. But gravity as a such is more fundamental. The property that a material entity has to attract another, we cannot, strictly speaking, we cannot measure it. We simply receive it. So this is what there is also a very famous phrase by Newton itself, that in a query of his optics says, I can show you what is gravity, but I don't know what gravity is. Okay. The work of science is possible thanks to a number of ontological presuppositions, having significance also on the gnoseological level. Material entities must exist. They must exist according to specific nature. In addition to material energy, we have also an amount of non-material information. Scientific research acknowledges the need for an ontological foundation external to its method. Whenever it recognizes that any analysis of physical reality must start with some measurable dimensions, mass, topology, space-time, physical void, virtual energy, and so on. It is starting from these quantities that we can infer the probability that any other material elements may come into being as a result of the subsequent transformation. We need something to start with. The existence of an ontological foundation which gives reason of the being of material entities, of their specific properties, fundamental properties, and which is also the ultimate reason of why there is a positive amount of non-material information, indicates that a semantic intelligible area exists, where these notions, all these notions, acquire a meaning also for the intellectual context of science, although scientific method is unable to define or handle them. In other words, the existence of this semantic area, of a logos which gives reason for that, I introduced this term now, cannot be judged as nonsensical or limitless, even for those whose mind is shaped by scientific rationality. Moreover, precisely within this rationality, introducing the notion of a logos seems reasonable. So, I tried to show that a first semantic area exists, is the area indicated by the incompleteness of formal language. Now a second semantic area exists, is the area of ontological foundation, of ontological basis. Both areas are presupposed by science, they are meaningful for science, but science does not manage them because they are presuppositions of its work. And let me show this fine page by James Clerk Maxwell about ontological incompleteness. Science is incompetent to reason upon the creation of matter itself out of nothing. This is a response to Stephen Hawking more than 1 century before Stephen Hawking. A response not by a priest, but by Maxwell. We have reached the utmost limit of our thinking faculties when we have admitted that because matter cannot be eternal, a static system, it must have been created. It is only when we contemplate not matter in itself, but the form in which it actually exists. Look at this word, form. Form in which it actually exists. That our minds find something of which it can lay down, lay hold. That matter as such should have certain fundamental properties, that this should exist in space and be capable of motion, that its motion should be persistent and so on, are truths which may, for anything we know, be of the kind which metaphysicians call necessary. We may use our knowledge of such truths for purposes of deduction, but we have no data for speculating as to their origin. The same content in a contemporary scientist, just the same. The words are a little bit different, but the idea is just the same. Paul Davies. However successful our scientific explanation may be, they always have a certain starting assumption built in. For example, an explanation of some phenomenon in terms of physics presupposes the validity of the laws of physics, which are taken as given. But one can ask where these laws come from in the first place. One could even question the origin of the logic upon which all scientific reasoning is founded. Sooner or later, we all have to accept something as given, whether it is God, or logic, or a set of laws, or some other foundation for existence. We indicate as a meaningful discourse on the Logos the discourse that is possible to make in the two intelligible semantic area previously recognized as opening of formal scientific language, opening to an ontological foundation. Let us see two aspects of the researcher's activity where such a logos seems to be recognized as a rational and objective otherness, a dialogical and personalistic otherness. And these are the last two steps of my talk. Okay? We have seen these two semantic areas. Now our focus is upon the human person who does science. We move our attention from the empirical level, the very empirical level, from the formal language, to the subject of scientific analysis. Once we have proved, or once we have tried to prove, that there are two semantic areas at our disposal to speak about the logos. Number 4, the acknowledgement of a logos as an objective, rational order in nature, in the work of science. You know that the word logos, Greek word logos, may be translated in Latin in two different ways. Ratio and the verbo. So logos has these two dimensions. The dimension of rationality, but also the dimension of a dialogue. And all these two dimensions are present in the work of science, in my opinion. Scientists approach the notion of logos when they wonder about the origin of the rationality of the physical cosmos, about the intelligibility and the stillness of the laws of nature. We can understand the physical universe in mathematical terms. Its laws are effective over large-scale space and long days of time. The same elementary particles have identical properties all over the space-time. And the chemical physical properties of chemical elements follow ordered structures. The physical behavior of the cosmos seems to show a kind of rational foundation with which the researcher comes into contact. Maxwell, Planck, de Broglie, Einstein, Paul Davies, John Barrow, Roger Penrose, all these authors encountered the enigma of intelligibility in their different atoms. And this enigma has been pointed out by their works, from Maxwell up to Penrose. But perhaps one of the most famous pages about intelligibility is a letter that Albert Einstein wrote to his friend Maurice Solving. And let's have a look to this passage from this letter. He's writing, this is the late Einstein, a few years before he died in 1955. You find it surprising, he's writing to Solving. You find it surprising that I think of the comprehensibility of the world as a miracle or as an eternal mystery. But surely, a priori, one should expect the world to be chaotic, not to be grasped by thought in any way. One might, indeed one should expect, that the world evidenced itself as lawful only so far as we grasp it in an orderly fashion. This would be a sort of order like the alphabetical order of words. On the other hand, the kind of order created, for example, by Newton's gravitational theory is of a very different character. Even if the axioms of the theory are posited by man, the success of such a procedure supposes in the objective world a high degree of order, which we are in no way entitled to expect a priori. In other words, Einstein says, there are two kinds of order. An order put by our heads, our minds, into things. These are the order, for instance, the alphabetical order. We have this order in our mind, and we impose this order to put order in nature. Okay? But if we look to nature, we realize, says Einstein, that the order we see is of a different kind. There could be some personal aspect, but there is an objective aspect that we cope with this objective aspect. Therein lies the miracle which becomes more and more evident as our knowledge develops. And here is the weak point of positivists and professional atheists, who feel happy because they think they have preempted, they have avoided, not only the word of the divine, but also of the miraculous. This is just a rhetorical phrase, just to say, well, atheists and positivists are happy, says Einstein, because they think they have emptied the world from any mystery. But they see that there are mysteries in the world, this kind of mysteries. Just 3 years before his death. In contemporary science, the question, the reflection on the rationality and intelligibility of the cosmos seems to concern the following fields: the debate on the epistemological status of the laws of nature, the quest for the constancy, identity, and universality of elementary properties of physical material entities, the wonder about the ultimate source or the ultimate reason for the order in nature, as a something independent from the intellectual categories of the known subject. The debate on the meaning of the anthropic principle. We have no time to enter into this question, but I put this only as one of the fields in which debate on rationality present in nature emerges. A more general debate on the possible presence of a design in nature. I do not enter in this.
Anthropic principle? What is it?
Anthropic principle is a general principle which puts in light that the values of the fundamental constants of the 4 fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetic force, weak nuclear and strong nuclear force, seem to have just the right values, between inverted commas, the right values to let the universe exist and evolve. If they were just a bit diverse, a bit different from the value they have, we cannot form galaxies, we cannot have stellar evolution, we cannot form planets, and we cannot have life. You have much bibliography in the interdisciplinary dictionary I directed on theology and science. You have also an entry, an article, Anthropic principle. You have it online in the web. Scientific method is enabled by itself to demonstrate that the rationality, order, or intelligibility of the cosmos are defects of the design, that is, of a purposive plane. At the level of science, we cannot infer this. The empirical sciences cannot infer the existence of any purposive intentional causality. Empirical sciences can only detect the lower levels of such feelings, if any. Coherence, rationality, teleonomy, but not intentional causality. By the instruments of scientific method only, this rationality and intelligibility are enabled to refer to something beyond the laws of nature. This is the reason why many authors employ expressions such as cosmic code, cosmic jackpot, theory of everything. So it seems that a semantic area exists. It is the area of why there is order in nature. But we have to stop there. We cannot infer from this order the existence of a designer, but only the fact that some other disciplines, philosophy or theology, can licitly speak of a creator or of a designer, because this notion of logos is meaningful also for the empirical level. But we can infer from the empirical level to a transcendental, to an intentional causality, intentional feelings. Freeman Dyson. The universe is an unexpectedly hospitable place for living creatures to make their home in. Being a scientist trained in the habits of thought and language of the 20th century, rather than the 18th, I do not claim that the architecture of the universe proves the existence of God. I claim only that the architecture of the universe is consistent with the hypothesis that mind plays an essential role in its function. It is enough for us. We do not need anything more. We do not need to demonstrate God. We only need to demonstrate that from the physical level. And Freeman Dyson, which, as far as you know, it is a agnostic, it is not a believer in any God, but he recognized that in the architecture of the universe there is room for mind. Mind plays an essential role. Why? What if we substitute mind for logos? The phrase goes well in the same way. The construction of the universe is consistent with the fact that a logos, a kind of order, does exist. Where? We do not know where. Who is the author? We do not know the author. Why is logos there? We do not know anything. But we have enough reason to say that there is a logos order. If cosmos and its laws are the one and same thing, we endorse pantheism. However, this view could be overcome by putting in light the problem of contingency. If the cosmos has a mind which does not transcend it, then this mind will be contingent as well. It seems then more reasonable to think that there is an absolute which gives reason of both the existence and the rationality of physical reality. But it is really other than the world. A step back. We see that there is a logos, but someone could say, well, the logos is the same laws of nature. Nature and the logos are the one and same thing. This is what philosophy calls pantheism. Why this is not a solution, in my opinion? It is not a solution because the problem of contingency says to us that if this mind is one and the same of nature, this mind should be contingent as well, because nature is contingent. And if we say that the nature is not contingent, our position is a materialist position, not a pantheist one. It's a different view. By resorting to the illative sense, that is, by relating what science says about the rationality of the cosmos to other philosophical or personal sources of knowledge. Altogether, these sources could suggest the existence of a personal knowledge, understood as something different from the cosmos. If we look at other different sources of knowledge, we could conclude that this logos is a personal logos. But if we confine ourselves to the analysis of science, we cannot infer the personality of logos. We cannot say anything about if it is personal or not. Last step, fifth and last one. The acknowledgement of a logos as dialogical otherness. Logos ut verbum in the research activity of scientists. You say now that the focus is more and more on the personality of scientists and research activity of scientists. Not only logos as order, but logos as dialogue, as a verb. When performing scientific activity, researchers also perceive reality as something objectively in front of them. Scientists are surprised that they can dialogue with nature, putting questions and receiving answers. They acknowledge nature and its laws as a dialogical otherness. In some cases, scientific activity looks like a dialogue between man and absolute. Just a parenthesis. In the first years of my training as a researcher, I worked for a while, for 10 years as an astronomer. The person who trained me taught me that it is very important to address questions to nature. And I remember that this senior researcher said to me, pay attention to address to nature the right question. Each experiment, every experiment is a question. One question, one experiment. But it's very important, I remember he said to me, to define very well the question and to address the right question, because every question costs money. And if you address a bad question, you waste money and you finished your career as a researcher. So it's very important to dialogue with nature. It is a metaphor. Yes, but perhaps it's something more than a metaphor. It's important to dialogue with nature and to address the right question. Because nature can answer only to the right question. It's a kind of witness that answers only if the question is well posed. As in a trial, there is a lawyer who addresses a question to a witness. If the question is not well posed, the witness can keep silent, can be silent. No? Only if the question is formally well posed, the witness answers. Nature works in this way. Heisenberg. Werner Heisenberg wrote a very nice page, a dialogue with Pauli and Dirac about, perhaps you know this dialogue, about spirits, souls, the divine, science and the divine. Heisenberg, can you or anyone else reach the central order of things or events whose existence stands beyond the doubt as directly as you can reach the soul of another human being? I'm using the term soul quite deliberately, so as not to be misunderstood. If you would put a question like that, the answer is yes. Heisenberg believed that when we perform a research work, we perceive nature as another person in front of us, as the soul of another person. We can dialogue with it. John Thornhill, physicist at Cambridge. Physicists laboriously master mathematical techniques because experience has shown that they provide the best, indeed the only way to understand the physical world. We choose that language because it is the one that is being spoken to us by the cosmos. Nature is recognized by scientists as worth of being studied. The interest for knowing in depth the central order of the things, as said Heisenberg, motivates their intellectual work, while nature's beauty and the quest for truth nourish all the efforts that work requires. Scientific research is seen not only as a commitment towards oneself or towards a social community, but it is also seen as a commitment for truth. At times we do not reflect upon these things because we have no time in our daily life to do this. No? But the very reason why we do research is this. Because we want passionately to know the truth.
Passionately, this is the term.
Why we are prepared to stay during whole nights without sleeping, just to put a point, another point on our graph, and to see if the law is this way or this way. We do sacrifices for this. It is just for social purposes. It is just to earn money. I think there is something more. Normally a researcher, if he wants to earn money, he or she does another work. It's more... Normally universities do not make so much, no? There is something. The feeling of awe and reverence scientists have towards the order and the beauty of nature led them to meet an experience of foundations. It is the experience of coming into contact with the deeper basis of physical reality. It could be called an experience of revelation. Every discovery, in a certain sense, is a kind of revelation. And the shock of discovery can become an encounter with the absolute. Henri Poincaré. The scientist does not study nature because it is useful to do so. He studies it because he takes pleasure in such a study. And he takes pleasure in it because nature is beautiful. If nature were not beautiful, knowing about it would not be worthwhile, and life would not be worth living. Very extreme statement, but definitely true. Max von Laue, for the greatest scientist, scientific experience of truth is, in a sense, theoria, that is a vision of God. This is the statement by an historian of science who have read many lives of many scientists, and he reaches this conclusion. Max Born, this picture is a little like that known to anyone who solves crossword puzzles. Yet it is much more than that, perhaps even more than the joy of doing creative work in other professions except art. It consists in the feeling of penetrating the mystery of nature, discover a secret of creation, and bring in some sense and order into a part of the chaotic world. It is a philosophical satisfaction. The notion of logos, which underlies the experience of foundations, or also the experience of awe and reverence, does not indicate only rationality and order. This notion brings also about this notion brings about also a meaning, conveys a message. It moves through respects and gratitude, sometimes to praise, as a form of dialogue. So the perception is different, it's one step further. It's not only the perception of order or rationality. It's the perception of something who moves to feelings of wonder, even of reverence. Of what? We do not know. We do not know about what. But these feelings are present in modern scientists. The gnoseological framework necessary to undergo this experience is an implicit metaphysics, one open to reality and prepared to learn from nature and its laws. The notion of logos as a central to this experience introduces the researcher into a mystery which is expected to contain the ultimate reason of the world. Research activity was at times described by some authors as experience of the sacred. Authors like Maxwell, Cantor, Planck, Augustin Cauchy, Poincaré, Lutzenbauer, Heisenberg, Einstein, Simpson, Teodosio Dobzhansky, all these authors made a comparison between scientific activity and religious activity. Concluding remarks. We're just finishing. I have then last episode after the conclusion if you want to talk to you about the last episode. In any case, these are the conclusions. Physical reality presents itself as something given, that is a datum, data, something whose order and rationality science does not create but receives. What scientific experience recognized as given may originate a kind of religious experience which acknowledges what is given as a gift that is given by someone. In this way, the perception of a logos ut ratio developed into the perception of a logos ut verbo. All people who make science knows that this word datum, data, is a very important word. We need data to do science. All science is to learn from data, is to discover data and to learn from data. Data is the past participle of the verb to give. Dare, datum, dare, is a dialogic verb. To give. There is something who gives something and some other who receives from something. At times we forgive that it is a very dialogical term. Data, just given from something. In English, gift, to give a gift, to give and to have a gift is the same. That means also gift. When describing their research activity, many scientists speak of a physical reality as an objective and coherent reality, having specific formal properties. The transition from such a perception to the notion of logos may occur when the scientist moves from encountering the problem of foundation to feeling the experience of foundations, from the problem to the experience, which causes scientific research to become similar to an experience of the sacred. In the context of scientific rationality, the world continues to show its opening to deep questions, or, if you prefer, an opening to mystery. it is still reasonable to wonder if the world as a whole has an all-encompassing explanation, which must necessarily transcend the method of science. The meaningfulness of this wondering points to a semantic area, to an ultimate source of intelligibility, which justifies, also in the context of scientific human experience, the significance of a discourse on God. And this is just a very short episode that I want to show you to conclude. Learning from an episode that occurred in Rome around 1980. The actors of this episode are John Paul II and Stephen Hawking. The episode takes place during a meeting, an assembly of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Stephen Hawking is a member of this academy. So long as the universe has a beginning, we could suppose that it had a creator. But if the universe is really completely self-contained, having no boundary or edge, it would have neither beginning nor end. It would simply be. What place then for a creator? This statement was pronounced in front of John Paul II during a speech that Stephen Hawking gave in the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. During a General Assembly of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, Stephen Hawking, a member of that academy, gave a talk on his cosmological model without any initial singularity. A model which describes, as you know, the existence of the universe out of nothing. Commenting on this model, Hawking affirmed publicly that for this model working, there was no need of any creator. John Paul II was there during the talk. Hawking revealed, and in one occasion he also wrote, that after that talk he expected to be condemned by the Catholic Church as a Galileo #2. This was expected by Stephen Hawking. However, the scientist was deluded because John Paul II didn't make any comment. I do not have, unfortunately, a photo of John Paul II and Stephen Hawking, but I have a photo of Paul VI with Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking won a special medal in 1975, and this medal was given by Paul VI. As far as I know, is the only photo I have ever seen of a pope by kneel before a scientist. So it is very unique. It's very unique. Okay? It's very unique. A few months after, so that happened in the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. A few months later, sometime after, during an informal meeting with scientists at Castel Gandolfo, John Paul II. John Paul II, during summertime, used to gather scientists, especially from Poland, to speak about hot issues in science in a very informal way. It is on the terrace, on the balcony of his residence. During this meeting, Joseph Chiczynski, who now has died, asked to John Paul II why he had no reaction after Hawking's talk at the Pontifical Academy. This was the moment in which to ask to the Pope why he kept silent. Dzieciński also reported the Pontiff Hawking's delusion to have not been condemned by him. He reported to John Paul II these delusions. John Paul II answered that in physics there was no reason to mention the Creator. And in this Hawking was right. However, he added, John Paul II added, that the physics presupposes philosophical questions, like, for instance, why the laws of nature exist, why the cosmos is intelligible, and he was persuaded that Hawking would not have denied the meaningfulness of such questions. Only in that case If these questions would have been denied, he, as Pontiff, had to say something. It is very nice to see that this episode, in a certain sense, summarized our path here today. The source is Joseph Ziczynski. It was a private communication during a dinner between us. Okay, I stop here. Thank you for your kind attention.